safety is always written in blood. I want our guys to make six figures working 40 hours a week instead of 60 hours a week. Value of people that we either work for or the people that we work with, and just seeing their value.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. I'm your host, Keith Norris, and today our guest is Spencer Maybee. Spencer is the Vice President at Western Pipe Fabrication, Inc. UPFI is a company based primarily in Salt Lake City and serving the surrounding areas. But Spencer is 30 years old, working in a family business. He's a husband, father of two young boys, plays rugby, cooks a mean smash burger, has an accounting degree from the University of Utah, and has been working with his father since he was 12 years old. So welcome to the podcast, Spencer. I was recently having a conversation with Spencer, and he was sharing with me some insights and just some things that he had picked up from other episodes of the podcast. And what I realized is we've been doing a number of these episodes with experts in the industry, people with 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years experience sometimes. And I wanted to make sure that we were capturing the other end of the lean continuous improvement journey. And Spencer is somebody who's really fairly early in his journey, I would say, of just learning what this continuous improvement thing is. So I thought it would be really interesting to have a conversation with Spencer to try to get an understanding of where somebody's at when they're first getting that interest in continuous improvement. So Spencer, tell us a little bit about UPFI.
Yeah, so Western Pipe, it started actually in the 1960s in Alaska. It was two friends who were welders working on the Alaskan pipeline, and they eventually made their way to Utah. They were doing refinery work and oil and gas plants and things like that. And my dad and my grandfather and my uncle actually all worked for a competing company, LF Bud, in the 80s and 90s. And my uncle Robert, shortly after he was married, he got laid off, and he'd worked around Western Pipe. They're a competitor, so he went to work for them, and they knew my uncle and my dad and my grandpa pretty well, and they approached my dad and my uncle and said, "You guys should purchase us and buy us out, and I think it would be a good thing for you guys." And they said, "Not a chance." They did not want to do this. My dad actually was going to school for accounting. My uncle Robert was going to school. They knew they wanted to do anything but continue to work in oil and gas and construction. And so they had no desire. My dad had graduated from accounting, in accounting, and the highest job offer he got was actually from another construction company to be an accountant in-house, and it was about half of what he was making currently in construction. And he had one small child at the time and another on the way, and so he stuck with construction, and eventually my grandpa wore him down, and my dad and my uncle purchased Western Pipe, and my grandpa came to work for them as an employee. And that was in 1993. I was born in 1994, so the company's 1 year older than I am, and at least under the current ownership. And they started working out just anything for a buck. That's still kind of our mantra. WPFI stands for a lot of things. One of those is we'll pray for income, and we'll do anything for a buck, or we have in the past. But we specialize in just general excavation, site excavation for commercial and industrial projects, and then pipelining. We've done crude oil lines, natural gas lines, some product lines, whether that's jet fuel, gasoline, or diesel, from Colorado to Washington, up into Wyoming. And we've done environmental projects in South Dakota and Colorado, capping mines and things like that. Done a lot of commercial buildings and started to get a lot more into the commercial space. So that's where we're at right now.
I talked to Spencer quite a bit on the weekends, and as I've asked him, what's going on? What kind of work are you doing? It has seemed to me like they've got a lot of different things going on. What I thought was interesting about Spencer's story, there's many things, of course, but when I met Spencer a number of years ago, he was in the middle of an education at the University of Utah, pursuing an accounting degree. And at that time, Spencer, you were working inside your family's company. I don't know if that was like something that you had to do or if it's something that you wanted to do. Tell us, what is it that took you, because you didn't take a traditional path through college. I think you maybe started a little bit later.
Yeah, actually going far back enough to kindergarten, we just pulled it out the other day. When I grew up, I said I wanted to be either an underground coal miner or a trained conductor. And so I probably had the two most likely jobs, and I didn't succeed at either one of my childhood dreams. But going through high school, I knew college was not for me, or at least I thought so at the time. High school is not for me. I barely graduated from Viewmont, had to do a number of packets, not necessarily from lack of brain power. I just did not show up. I could not stand going to school, and I served a mission in Western Australia, and I was in the Pilbara in one of the areas, and there was a senior couple actually from Canada serving there, and we were driving in a car to a place called Marble Bar, one of the hottest places on earth, and she was talking the sister Coombs was talking to me, and she said, "What are you gonna do when you get home?" And I said, "I'm gonna go to construction, and that's the rest of my life. I'm gonna go work for my dad, and that's it." And she really encouraged me to get an education. So when I came home, I went to Salt Lake Community College because I thought, "Oh, I'll go for a semester or 2 and then drop out, so I don't wanna waste some serious money." So I started going to Slick, and at Slick, I started playing rugby. That's kinda what kept me in college was sports. Started playing rugby and started out in civil engineering, and then I switched to construction management, and after a couple semesters of that, it just felt like a waste of time. Like a lot of the things I'd learned, we would do either Caterpillar College or training through the AGC, American General Contractors, and things like that. And to me, it just was not something I liked. And eventually, I switched to accounting because I thought, what will help me if I stay in construction, and what will help me if I get out of construction. There's a lot of construction workers who break their bodies or break their backs and have to maybe make a career transition at some point in times. And so that was kind of my thought process with going to accounting.
I think that that story of having a picture of your life and maybe where it's headed, and then, at some point along the way, somebody gives you an idea like, hey, maybe you should go get an education, or maybe it's something else where somebody gives you an opportunity or asks you to think about some possibility for your life that you hadn't previously thought of. I think that's a pattern that happens in all of our lives at some point. Everybody who's done anything, any level of ambition, probably was prompted by somebody at some point. When I was asking Spencer to come be a guest on the podcast, one of his comments was something along the lines of, well, I don't know that much about lean. What do I have to offer? And my response was, I see something in Spencer that I'll call the spark, or that light, that drive that I actually think is inside of everybody. It doesn't always necessarily find its way out, but it's inside of everybody. It's part of just our evolution as humans to try to get better, to try to improve. And that's something that I've seen with Spencer, whether it's the university education. We've had some conversations about different books. Let me ask you, Spencer, I know that, since you graduated university, as much as you didn't like school, I probably fall into that camp too. I didn't like school, but after I left school, I had this urge to consume information and knowledge. What are some of either the books or the sources of information that you've turned to since then to better yourself, better your career?
100%. I think my number one source of knowledge has been and will always continue to be from conversations I have with other people, such as yourself, Keith. We were saying before this podcast, Keith's been my friend for about 8 years now, but whether he's known it or not, he's been one of my biggest mentors that I've looked up to and learned from. But there's a lot of people. My dad, of course. I mean, him and his brother, they always say, they're just two rednecks from Green River, Utah, just faking it till they make it. But I've learned a lot from my dad over the years, learned a lot from my father-in-law. I say I read books. I don't necessarily read a whole lot, but I love to listen to books. I have a lot of drive time or stick time operating equipment at work, and so I'll listen to books a lot. And that Comfort Crisis is one of the books. Another book, it has to be somewhat entertaining to me, but Shoe Dog, the story of Nike with Phil Knight. That's one of my favorite business entertainment books I've ever listened to. And so I listen to a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm probably your number one listener on KPI Fireside. A couple of years ago when I was going through a seminar to get my own general contractor's license through the AGC in Utah, they did have it was like a 30-minute presentation on the Lean Construction Institute, as I was telling you about. And that's when it like sparked my interest with lean.
There's a lot of people that work inside of a family business, and I want to get to some of the challenges of family business because family businesses have a whole unique set of challenges that apply differently in other organizations. But you also have this spark to want to do things better and do things differently. And I know Spencer's father also, and he's a super great guy. I know through some conversations that you and I have had, like there's some things where working in a family business, there's lots of things where, well, this is the way that it's always been done. And I think that's one of the key principles of this concept of continuous improvement or lean is that the way it's always been done doesn't necessarily have to be the way that it's always done. I'm wondering if there's some moments or some changes that you've seen through however you came across that insight. What are some of the things that you've felt compelled to make changes inside of the business?
100%. One of those is, it's common in construction to work a lot of overtime. And a few years ago, we were just talking about wages, and a lot of our guys were making six figures, but they were working 2,500 or close to 3,000 hours a year, which was insane. And it was a fight between me and my dad. But I said, "Hey, I want our guys to make six figures, working 40 hours a week, instead of 60 hours a week." And even things such as wage increase, it was a big fight between him and I. We have four key employees currently who have all been with us over 20 years, and they've given us their time. They've given us time away from their families. We work out of town a lot. Some of them, they've given us their bodies. Their backs are worn and stuff, and so just the fight to take care of those guys, and it's something we've always wanted to do, but just making sure it's sustainable is another part too.
You said something to me the other day that there's a course that you found that's available to you that's offered by, is it another construction company locally?
Yeah, it's sponsored by Oakland Construction, and yeah, it's through the Lean Construction Institute.
One reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast now is because you have this spark, you have this idea, like you have these preconceived notions. And I know some of the people listening to this podcast are actually responsible for putting on these kind of events, right? Some of the people that are in this continuous improvement world are facilitators at different level. They're either designing programs, they're directing the implementation of some of these trainings. Some of these people are giving some of these trainings. So from your perspective as somebody who you've seen this training a few times, I think you mentioned to me that you've actually signed up for it maybe once before, but you weren't able to make it.
Yes.
Interesting. A kind of picture in your mind of what lean is. I'm curious for you, realizing that it you don't have to be right. This isn't
Yeah.
a test, but I'm curious what you think this lean thing that you're getting interested in, what it might do for you, what it offers to you.
I was really interested in lean the first time they talked about it. I think I shared it with you on Saturday. They talked about lean, and just one of the things is of waste. And it talked about, production and overproduction and underproduction, and specifically tied to welding, which is one of the services we do. And it said, all right, this is the time that the welder is actually welding. And then all the pre activities, you have to prepare the metal, you have to carry the material in, you have to preheat, and then he welds. And then after he welds, maybe he'll have to buff his weld, or he'll have to, non destructive testing, whether that's mag particle testing or, testing of that nature. And so, it said the activity is welding, but that welding is only maybe 5% of the total time that it takes to do that. So I was fascinated, like, hey, how can we as a company, how can lean help us to, all right, now we're welding 50% of that time or 75% of that time and eliminating some of those wastes, especially being, a family owned and a small business waste, whether that's overproduction or underproduction, as I've started to learn about it. I think that's one of our greatest struggles right now.
Tell me more about that.
In construction, there's a lot of activities. Like you think of paving a road, you're like, well, that's pretty simple. You go out, you bulldoze it, and then you put the paver on it. But now there's a lot of things. You know, one of the projects we're working on right now, you have to take out, 4 feet of fill. You have to put in structural fill. Has to be compacted in 8-inch lifts. In between, the some of the middle lifts, we have to put geotextile fabric in to support the load. And then after it's tested, each lift will have a compaction tested. And then after that, you have to have the right moisture level. So we have watering activities and all these. And there's about a month buildup and then 1 day of paving. And so it's interesting to me. I just wanted to see some of the lean aspects and ways that maybe we can streamline some of these processes a lot better.
So when Running a family-owned business, particularly a small one, and just for context, give us an idea of like the number of employees or people that work in the business.
Currently, we have 15 field employees. We've gone up to 35, and a few years ago, we were down to about 7 or 8, and so it kinda fluctuates upon our own supply and demand of work.
And running a small business is, what I find is interesting is most of these things that happen in business, although there's some really huge companies and there's some really small ones, it's all the word I might use is fractal. Like it's a lot of it is like these small units, even in big companies, you have a lot of small units. Running a small business, you don't necessarily have to talk about your most pressing immediate needs, but you've been involved in the business over 15 years now. You've seen a lot of stuff. Tell us about some of the challenges that you've seen in running a business where you felt like, I wonder if there's a better way of doing that.
I think definitely one of the things I was, listening I believe it was one of your podcasts last week, I was listening to it, and it said, "If you don't have a guy for that, you're that guy." And, I don't have enough hands, feet, elbows, shoulders to wear enough hats or to hold enough hats, as many hats as it feels like we wear as a small business owner. And, before I stepped in and helped my dad worked 100% in the field during the day and 100% in the office at night. And, if he averaged 4 hours of sleep a night, I would be pretty impressed. And, now that I've stepped into it, I don't know how he handled that. I've stayed up to 2 or 3 in the morning, most nights doing office work, catching up, but, now I'll have to, regularly shut down on a Friday and do office work, and that was another one of the principles I took from your podcast, when they talked about productivity levels. They're like, "Hey, if you are you wanna operate at 80% on a 4-day work week instead of a 5-day, then that 5th day you can always use as a catch up," and so that's one of the things I've been trying to use with ours right now. We typically work 4 10s, and so I've been setting aside Friday. I told you the other day I'd come in dirty, but, luckily today I was able to just stay in the office and do invoicing and, got a couple bids out instead of having to go out in the field and play catch up.
Anybody who's worked in big companies, a lot of big companies, you think of like these standard operating procedures. You have manuals on how things are done. In a small business, and really there's a lot of small businesses where the knowledge is more tribal. I'm curious, your dad worked in this business for many, many years before you started, but there's a lot of things I'm sure that you've had to learn from him and the way he's done that. As a child growing up in that household and seeing how hard your dad worked or how he worked, are there some things that taught you that are either positive or things where where you maybe learned a lesson like, "Oh, I wanna do things differently"?
I think a lot of both. I mean, all of them are pretty positive. If you ask me, I had a wonderful childhood. I mean, probably the biggest thing I learned from my dad is work hard, play hard. I mean, he worked hard, he worked all the time, but man, we knew how to play and we played hard. We had dirt bikes growing up and went camping and boating and vacationing, and he always stayed very present in our lives. And other things, I think I noticed maybe more things I wanted differently probably once I started getting into the business. A lot of people talk about work life balance now, and it wasn't so much maybe work life balance, but just adjusting things and making some of those, standard operating procedures to, hey, how can we, optimize this? And one of the things that I did immediately when I started helping out was all of his time tickets were on paper and it was awesome, but like record keeping was crazy. I was like, this could be a simple Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc that we can all share and they can start copying. You know, you're doing the same task every week or every day. Like you can make a timesheet really quick instead of having to write it out. And we one of our customers is Chevron, and he'd have this timesheet that he'd written out by hand, and he'd submit it, and his change might be off by a couple cents. Because as you added it all up, as you're trying to read someone's chicken scratch, it could get off from our set rates, and so even things like just standardizing our timesheets on Excel is one of the big things that I helped with that it's already made huge improvements throughout our company.
Are there some things in a family-owned business that you find hard to change? I know that, as I get older, there's certain things that I don't necessarily like to see changed. I think there's as humans, sometimes people say that we don't like change. I think we as humans like change. We just don't like being changed. I'm curious if you're running into any tensions with things you want to change versus things that, your father doesn't want to change.
Yeah, my dad has been amazing and, like, way open. Instead of, like, backlash, this is where his anxieties have maybe started to show, which is pretty interesting because growing up, my dad would be like, I don't believe in anxiety. It's not a real thing. But now, like, we put GPSs on all of our excavators and our dozers so we can 3D model our job sites now. And it can be a learning curve, especially if you're not used to technology or running AutoCAD or anything, having this 3D model on your excavator to dig to. And for him, he gets crazy. Just have some guy out there on a grade rod and tell me where to dig. And it's like, Dad, we don't need that person out there. This machine will tell you exactly where to dig now. And it was we implemented this about 3 years ago, and it wasn't until this very week that we have VRS on one of our excavators. So a lot of standard GPS systems, you'll set up a base station on the job site and have to set that up every day and calibrate it. But the VRS uses the state's geospatial GPS system, and it knows where your excavator are, and you can calibrate to the job site. And so he doesn't have any base station or anything. He's working on a bakery out by the airport, and he's like, "Man, this is awesome. It's telling me right where to dig, how deep to dig, the grade to dig, and it's just me out there." And he loves it because he's sitting in a machine now, just playing all day, and instead of having to look at plans, getting frustrated where he's at, getting mad at the grade guy because he did his math wrong and now he dug 6 inches too deep or didn't dig deep enough. And so that was one of the backlashes at first. Introducing that technology. One, financially, it was a big investment for us, and then two, just the investment to learn it. And so that was a big thing. That was a push and shove between him and I to incorporate in our company.
That's so interesting. I think one of the key principles of continuous improvement is just this idea that things can get better. One of the places where, of course, like saving money and all these things that have productivity improvements, those are definitely things that you want to tackle. But a lot of times, improvements can just start with things that frustrate you or things that you don't like about your job. I think, if I remember correctly, you've told me some stories about some responsibilities that you took away from your dad or that you gave away from yourself that kind of fit into that category of making the work more satisfying, more rewarding.
So, looking at some of these bigger companies, they have full-time office people. And it was about 2 years ago. I said, hey, one of us probably needs to either go full-time or part-time in the office. And he looked at me and basically just said, dibs, not it. My dad, he's 61. He's an amazing operator. He's an amazing businessman, but he likes operating. He likes working hard. He still likes getting in the trench. He likes being with the guys in the field and being behind a computer screen where he already has some anxieties or struggles with technology a little bit is not where he wants to be. And so by doing that, it's streamlined it. He's still in the field kicking butt and then I'm able to handle all the things that he doesn't like. And so right now it's more of him doing more of what he likes and me figuring out what I like or what I can be best at, and then trying to find other people to help me with those things as well.
And one thing that I really like about this discipline and just the vision and the promise that continuous improvement offers is that I think sometimes people feel like the work or the job that you do is going to suck a certain amount. Like people that are in a bad job or in a bad situation, they feel like, I don't like work. I don't like going to work. But I think that there's another subset of people, and I think that everybody would probably, not that everybody wants to always work, but I think that if you need to work, you would prefer to work in an environment that you like, that you enjoy, that it's satisfying, that it's rewarding, that your work has purpose, that you feel like you're making progress, that you're getting things done. I've had a few conversations with your dad, so this might be a leading question, but when do you think he'll retire?
As soon as he hits that 6 feet under, that's when he's gonna retire. He'll probably dig his own grave. I mean, he doesn't plan on he loves what he does, and, we might have to get one of those lifts to put a wheelchair in an excavator, but he'll be digging as long as he can.
Well, one of the other topics of continuous improvement is definitely safety. So I'm curious what kind of, I don't know if you have some thoughts on how safety has evolved or how that's changed in the 30, 40 years in your industry.
Yeah, for
For
sure.
sure.
Safety is a huge thing, and that's something that we're always focusing on, not just for a compliance point, but also operator comfort. A lot of times, a safe operator is a more comfortable operator and things like that. And even right now, a big thing that we're dealing with is kind of the push to go to the European style or the class two hard hats with the chin strap. And a lot of the jobs that we do, you said we do tree climbing, we do right away clearing and stuff, and we also do work inside oil tanks. And, so, like, having a chin strap on a hard hat for some of those is a bit advantageous, but, a guy sitting in a trench digging a machine, there can be some backlash with having to adapt to the newer style hard hats and things like that, but also safety, it goes way outside just your personal protective equipment you're wearing in construction. It goes to what are you doing as a culture, like your company culture. Are you gonna use a trench box or are you gonna tell a guy to risk it? Are you gonna have a ladder? Are you gonna have the right equipment there? Are you gonna have guards on your equipment? Or is it okay to risk it or, whatever it takes to get the job done? And so that's been a big thing. Safety is always written in blood. And like I said, my grandpa actually worked for Western Pipe when he was in that automobile accident. He rolled a crane truck and we have one of our employees is a Smith driving instructor. We take defensive driving very seriously. We've got monitors in our trucks to monitor driving behaviors, and we train on that, and we try to address that. And there's other key aspects of safety. And so, along with continuous improvement, that being a aspect with safety in it, that's something that we're very interested in.
When it comes to things like safety and training and continuing to learn, kind of come up with these ideas. You mentioned this course that you came across. Are you aware of other resources available to small businesses to learn whether it's continuous improvement or lean or other related things?
Yeah, one of the best resources for us has been the AGC, specifically the Utah Associated General Contractors. They offer tons of courses, whether that's safety. We use Click Safety for a lot of our OSHA trainings. Through the oil and gas world, we use ISNet and MEA or Energy U for a lot of our operator qualification trainings and things like that. We also utilize a lot of our vendors, Caterpillar, their local branch in Utah is Wheeler, and Wheeler offers, on-site training for equipment and things like that. A lot of our vendors who we either rent or purchase equipment from, we do training through them, whether that's safety or productivity and things like that. So we do a lot of trainings. We're part of the Utah Trucking Association. We do safety trainings through them, and there's a lot of you get into construction to get out of school. At least that's what a lot of our high school employees or some of our new hires have said. And the first thing we do is we're putting them through a 40-hour course, and they have to go sit back in the classroom.
Sure, they love that.
Oh yeah.
You've mentioned a few things through our conversation already that I would put into the category, inside lean, there's this pillar of respect for people and whether it's respect for employees by treating them, giving them safe working conditions and treating them fairly, whether it's respect for customers by giving them, good quality work in exchange for the value or the money that they might provide. Even respect for things like the environment. I mean, respect is one of those core values that can be applied in a lot of different ways. How do you guys think about employees at WPFI?
Employees are family, literally and figuratively, but it is a small business and our employees, my dad's, you know, when him and his brother purchased the company and took it over, they always said, we want to treat employees the way we want to be treated, the golden rule. And, even that, original Henry Ford, they want their employees to be able to afford and have the lifestyle that they want. I mean, a lot of our new employees, they're driving personal vehicles that we've purchased or we're sending them on 2 3 weeks vacations to places of their choice. And we even had employees say, I've never not received a tool that I've asked for. Some of the tools we buy, like we just got a socket set that was $5,000, which might sound crazy to someone who doesn't buy tools. Our guys, we always believe in giving them the right tool for the job. And we've lost money on jobs just to safety up or to tool up for our guys to get what they want. And in the end, it may have been a loss on that job, but it's led to people that have stuck with us for 20 years. And, it's a lot of loyalty that has come from that through our employees.
I think one thing that's interesting and maybe a little bit unique, particularly about family-owned businesses, is in family-owned businesses, you might say that it's harder to maybe let go of certain employees, like, that's like their family, right? We gotta maybe if they're not the job let's say you improve the job. This is something that happens in lean, and a lot of times lean can have a bad reputation when it's used purely for cost savings, where somebody comes in and says, "Alright, let's outsource our call centers to, overseas, and let's cut all those jobs, right? That's an example of like the downside of lean. In a lot of businesses, when you figure out a way to make something 20%, 50% more efficient, or to make some job completely irrelevant, I have a hunch that in a family owned business, you treat that excess capacity in a way that, might be different than somebody who's like, well, let's just cut that job. Has there been some situations where you guys have had some excess capacity and you had to find things for people to do that could add value or to be useful for the organization?
For example, in our industry and for our company, it's pretty typical to be slow throughout the winter months. And my dad's paid numerous employees to work on their own house, or paid other employees to go work on other houses, to tile houses or build a shed or a playroom or a garage. And so that's an easy one. Instead of laying people off in the winter, he tries to keep people employed. But there's other things, there's times where we have duplicity on job sites, where two guys have been with us for 20 years and you only need one foreman, and the other guy's going to be a laborer and equipment operator, but you're not going to cut their salary down to, an operator or laborer role just because, you already have a foreman. And that's something as a family business, in a small business, I feel that we are proud that we can do. We can keep two guys on the job site that are, at full pay instead of cutting one down to, save costs or pad our pockets that we always talk about. And I think it just kind of goes back to that fundamental. We want to treat others the way that we want to be treated and things like that.
Again, you're starting this kind of lean journey. You're getting into a little bit more of a formal introduction, some formal training in this. Are there some things in your business that you're maybe predicting, or you might have a hunch that this is an area that you want to, think about improving?
Um, Definitely. I think our biggest thing right now is scaling. In the past 2 years, we've kind of doubled our size, at least as far as revenue goes. And I think kind of to get to that next level, we're going to have to start implementing a lot more kind of standardized procedures, and hoping that like through some of this formal lean training, and we'll be able to, make some of our own procedures, or adapt other procedures that other companies have had. And that's kind of where we see, we want to scale it. Right now, every one of our foremans that we have is a working foreman. And it kind of came to me, one of the things I want to be able to, we can float superintendents that are not working superintendents and things like that, to where we can get to where we can carry some of that overhead. And so as we scale, we're gonna need to create more procedures and things like that to keep us all aligned and keep us in the right direction.
Excellent. One of the concepts inside lean is this idea of flow and getting you talked about like the highs and the lows, the ups and the downs in business, the seasonality. And those are things that, a lot of businesses have. And one of the principles of lean that you can perhaps look forward to figuring out how to take advantage of in your business is this idea of flow, so that you have probably fewer peaks and fewer valleys, and to try to get a little bit more um, flow happening. So hopefully that's something that you find in your future as well.
Yeah, really looking forward to all that.
What are some of the problems or issues that you have in your business currently that you think this lean discipline you might be able to apply it towards?
I think one of those is definitely predicting what we do. We don't necessarily have a huge backlog of what we've done in the past, and that's on us. We need to start maybe recording our data a little bit better, our productivity levels, our efficiency levels of, how much pipe are we putting in the ground per day, or how many cubic yards of dirt are we excavating a day, or things like that. How many feet of right away or miles of right away are we clearing in a day, and just making more predictive estimates of projects that'll help us with our estimating, with our takeoffs, and then ultimately with our planning and execution of the job sites and projects.
I'm curious. I'm going to ask a few leading questions, I guess, with some concepts that come to mind that you might find applicable. But how do you think of capacity in your business? Like, your capacity to do work. How do you think of that, about that?
That's tough. I mean, I made a joke the other day when we were hanging out. It feels like I'm running a whorehouse by hand. Capacity a lot of times. It's tough. It's like, how much can I physically do in a single day? And then how much can I mentally do? And, there's only 10 of us. How much can we actually do? And so running a small business, some of these jobs that we're bidding on, we're bidding against huge companies, that have hundreds of employees or thousands of employees. I mean, they have crews larger than our entire company. yet we're still in the race against those. And so kind of finding our niche and making that, how can we be more productive? How can we cut out some of these costs that these larger companies have to carry, the overhead that they're carrying? How can we compete against that? And how can we expose some of their weaknesses and win bids against them and ultimately perform those projects?
One thing that, in my observations, you guys do, you have a lot of capabilities. So I might compare that to a shop that can make a lot of different things, right, in a manufacturing world, or a service provider that you guys basically are a service provider. You provide, all kinds of services. How do you think about the mix of services that you provide? I mean, I'm sure you guys have at least thought at one point of another of like, maybe we should focus. But I also know that in conversations with Scott, your dad, that he likes the variety. So like there's a job satisfaction element that comes from the variety. How do you think about that mix of the different services?
And over the past probably 3 years, we've kind of been, we have an oil and gas side, and for those companies like, uh, Chevron or Marathon, your Exxons and Shells that we do work for, we can be an in-house one-stop shop for them, where we can do their right-of-way clearing and their tree climbing, and, we've done things such as marking the line and painting fence posts, or even for Chevron, we've been an in-house plumber and fixed their restrooms at some of their facilities. We're bidding on these big job sites. We're not able to bid against, small time, or not even small time, but full time plumbers. That's just not our wheelhouse. And so we kind of have a oil and gas side that services everything on those ends because it makes sense. Where those are negotiated contracts. And then on our hard bids, man, we're just focusing on utilities and dirt work and what we know we are good at. And so that's one of the ways that we're kind of, we'll do it for some people, but not for everybody.
Spencer, I want to ask you now to do a little bit of a forward looking and then maybe some backward looking. But let's say, project yourself 5 or 10 years into the future. What is different about Western Pipe, and what are some things that Spencer has learned or achieved?
In 5 to 10 years, like currently, I'm involved in like every project we have, but I'd love to have, a few different project managers and superintendents that oversee their job that require very minimal oversight or, help from. Right now, I'm bidding all of the projects that we're on, and then I'm project managing. We have different crews that can perform the actual work, but I still have to organize, the material goes here, or, they need X amount of people on this job site. I'm still kind of orchestrating that, but kind of putting in those different levels of management and workforce where we have that skilled workforce where I'm not necessarily handling every project, and maybe I'll just handle larger projects or certain customers, but that's kind of where I see us in 5 to 10 years.
What are your favorite parts about being involved in the work that you do?
Man, I still love I'm like my dad, I still love getting in and doing the work. I love hopping in the bulldozer and cranking it, cranking the power all the way up and just cutting in earth. I love feeling the power of the machines. I love the negotiations of the deal. I love working our estimates as we've kind of gone through some of our numbers the past couple of years and kind of really figured out where we need to be profitable and to be competitive. I love getting in the numbers, kind of the art of the deal, working those bids so that we can come out, as the bid winner, which typically is the lowest bid, but still able to turn a profit.
Excellent. So now, if you look back a little bit, maybe you think about yourself 5 years ago. Are there some lessons that you've learned in the last few years that you'd like to jump back and say, here's some advice you should take?
Definitely, it's the school of hard knocks. I've paid a lot of tuition to that, financially and physically to it. I think one of the things that I've learned is, the work will always be there tomorrow. There's times where I've stayed up the whole night doing office work, and you send out emails and you get these answers to people, and sometimes it's appreciated. Most time it's not really appreciated or even cared about. And so I think just realizing that, like, hey, like the work's still going to be there tomorrow. I mean, we always perform our best and do our best, but I think that's one of the things I've learned is don't kill yourself to be the lowest bid.
You know, as we talk about behavior patterns and norms, I talk a lot about culture as the way we do things around here. And in a family business, a lot of that stuff is not written down, but it is tribal and it is passed along. if you think years into the future, if you think about some of these, I would even describe them as maybe core values or behaviors. You spend a lot of time working with your dad. Sounds like your grandfather worked in the company as well. You've got two young boys now. Let's say maybe it's only 10 years away because you started when you were 12, but maybe it's 10 or 20 years. What are some things that you would like to still be true at Western Pipe, or what are some things that you've maybe learned through the company that you hope are core values to instill into your two boys?
One is just the value of people, the people that we either work for or the people that we work with, their value and just seeing their value. And the other one is just the principle of hard work. Whether you work in an office or you work in the field, like putting in an honest day's work and doing your best, I think is something that's being lost. I have friends that work remote jobs and they work two or three and they're putting in a half hearted effort in two or three of those jobs, in between playing Xbox. But I think the value of hard work is something that I want to instill in my boys, whatever they do, if they stay in the family business or if, we're acquired by someone else and they work for them or whatever they end up doing. I just think the value of hard work is something that I want to instill in them.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. So as you're on this path, you're learning this continuous improvement, you're going to this course, you're going to come maybe back to your company in a few weeks and there's going to be some ideas and you're like, hey guys, we should do this. Or I learned about this thing, we should try that. How do you expect that to be received inside your organization?
I think naturally there's always some pushback, you know, because a lot of those guys, they've worked with my dad or for my dad longer than I've been alive. And so they're like, Scott's kid's on it again. He made us do this GPS crap. It's kind of been working out so far. He changed the logo or he changed this, like, I don't know. There'll be some pushback, but I think a lot of the things we think through carefully. My dad and I, we always discuss it thoroughly and implement it together. Whether we're fully on board, we act unanimous. And so, as I was talking about today, one of the things that, waste, whether that's, you know, overproduced or underproduced, I think that's one of the first things we want to start implementing. I'm sure there'll be some pushback and there'll be some adjustments, but hopefully as we just continuously improve, we'll be able to adapt and overcome.
Spencer, I think I'm really interested and excited to have you back in a few months or something and hear how this introduction to lean course and maybe some of the things that come after are starting to influence the way things work inside of your organization. One thing that I hope to communicate with this podcast is I think sometimes people feel like there's this thing called lean and that they need to learn it. And then once they learn it, like they can check it off, or that lean is something that they do. And, my message or my philosophy is that lean is definitely a business improvement methodology. And in some ways, you could look at it as a life improvement methodology. It aligns with a lot of just best practices, common knowledge, common sense of how to live a good life, how to have effective relationships, to focus on things like adding value, to reduce things that are wasteful or not helpful. The lessons can apply to so many different areas. So yeah, I'm super interested to have you come back and share with us a little bit of your journey and how that's evolving, because every company has their own culture. Every company has their own way of doing things. And I would expect that as you go through this journey, you're going to learn some new terms. You're going to learn some new language. You're going to maybe learn some concepts where you say, "Oh, that's something that we were already doing, but now I know how that came to be, or why that is important, or how I can apply that in in other areas." But I definitely think that you've got a great set of core values working for you from those that have been passed on from your dad and from the company, and just however you've developed those yourself. I see you as being a super successful business owner, a super successful husband and father with what you're doing with your family. And, for anybody that's listening to this podcast, if somebody shared this with you or put you on this path, it's probably because they see that spark in you also, and are serving this up. And one thing that's interesting, and we've talked about this, it's always hard to give someone an idea and expect them to change, right? Like if you say, "Hey, you're gonna do this," that's always hard. But as a leader, one of the things that you can do is you can put people in an environment And again, if they're your direct report at work, sure, you can tell them exactly what to do. But leadership a lot of times is putting people in an opportunity where they can learn and just letting them find that spark that they have in themselves, that intrinsic need really to improve and to grow and to progress. And so, Spencer, I'm super excited to follow along with you as you go on this journey. We'll maybe have you back on the podcast and you can tell us about some of the progress that you're making on this journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith.
This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all-in-one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise-wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We appreciate your time and your experience. And for anybody listening, if you'd like to suggest a guest, ask a question, or give us any ideas for episodes or content, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me, Keith Norris. And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us on the socials and share the podcast with friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change.